Hi, Matt from Focus Training here with the second in our unconscious bias series. In this video, we want to attempt to answer a question that many leaders ask, which is, how do I recognize the signs of unconscious bias in my own decision-making or thought process? To help us do this, we're going to use a tool put forward by a well-known philosopher named John Rawls. Rawls posited something he referred to as the veil of ignorance, which is basically a thought experiment for leaders and policymakers. The idea was fairly simple. Before you enact a new law, procedure, or policy, Rawls suggested that a leader should step behind what he called the veil of ignorance and imagine that you have yet to be born. So, as this unfinished person, you do not yet know where in the world you'll be born, into what circumstances you'll be born, how well off financially will your family be, what religion or belief system will you be raised in, what government will the nation where you live operate under, what access will you have to education or other tools, what language will you speak, how will you look physically, what will your gender identity be. All of these different factors that make human beings unique, if we imagine them for a moment to all be generic or to not yet be aware of them, Rawls says, now set your policy. Now make your law or write your procedure. And when we do that, the idea is that we would probably, as human beings, write a procedure, policy, or law that wouldn't damage us in some way if we were then born into a certain situation, a certain body, a certain part of the world. This is a useful tool for self-reflection. That thought experiment can be really valuable. But there are some weaknesses. Obviously, one of the weaknesses that we face is if we're ignorant of some of the differences that are possible out there in the world or the impact of those differences on our experience. So for example, one of the partner organizations that we work with recently rolled out, because all their employees are working from home, a stipend that employees could use to spend on improving their home office. And they were very excited about this new benefit for their employees. Employees were excited too. But as they started as leaders to reflect on this veil of ignorance, one of the employees who was brought into the discussion brought up the fact that they were being asked to spend the money themselves on this new office equipment and then ask and wait for reimbursement from the HR organization. This put some employees in a tough position because they maybe didn't have the $400 or $500 available to spend and wait for that reimbursement check. It would be a difficult financial prospect for them. This was something that hadn't crossed the minds of some of the managers and executives who had made the policy and were excited about it. So again, this ignorance of difference and impact is what creates some of these unfortunate outcomes. This is a real weakness in the veil of ignorance. How do we solve for it? Well, this points us at one of the best practices of leaders who are trying to recognize unconscious bias in their own decision-making, which is to actively invite other voices into the decision-making process. The reason this organization recognized the gap was that they had invited employees at different levels in the organization to discuss the policy and provide feedback. And they had created a culture in the organization that welcomed that feedback, where employees felt enough trust to voice that feedback out loud. So one of the things we can do now as a leader to recognize our own unconscious bias is build a culture where others can point it out to us when they see it, build that sense of trust and relationships with others that tell them it's safe to come to us when they recognize unconscious bias that may be at play in our decision making. And two, to actively invite other voices into our decision-making process, to ask for feedback and guidance about the decisions we're making so that we can recognize those biases when they exist. Be sure to check out the final video in our 3-part series coming soon.